So the 14th movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Doctor Strange, has dropped. It got great reviews, it's making tons of money, and I liked it personally. You can check out my review above. With that said, this seems like a great opportunity for me to rank all 14 movies in the MCU, tell you what I think about them. And before we even get started, I just want to state the obvious. I think it's awesome that we live in a day and age where movies like Doctor Strange, Guardians of the Galaxy exist, and they're good. That Marvel has done this incredible thing of bringing all these properties together and actually creating a cinematic universe of the comic book, something that was never even fathomable 20 years ago. And here we are almost 10 years into it, and they are going strong, and they're doing a great job. They have perfected the art of packaging these movies in a way that is enjoyable for common man to enjoy them. Even my wife, who knows nothing about Doctor Strange, could not tell you a single thing about him, loved the movie. That is awesome that they're doing that, and it's awesome that we live in a time like this. Actually, 3 of my buddies here on YouTube have put out their own videos ranking the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You can look at Cody Leach, Mike Rock, and David O'Sullivan have all done very similar videos. And what's so fun about this is that we have very few that are in the same spots. There's a few similarities, but there's a lot of variety, and that's kind of what's fun about this. Lastly, before I get started, I want to say I think these are all enjoyable movies. Even the ones at the bottom that have story issues and some problems along the way, there's still movies that I can sit down, watch, and enjoy. At number 14 is Thor: The Dark World. It's a movie, obviously I own it, I enjoy it enough, but at the same time, it's the most forgettable of the Marvel movies to me. Literally, I can't remember much about what happened. I believe I've seen it 2 times. It's the only one I skipped seeing in theaters, and it didn't even cross my mind really much to go see it. Then I saw it and I was like, oh, that's why I skipped it. It wasn't very memorable. I believe the villain's name is like Malik or something like that. And I only know that because there was an episode of Movie Fights where they were fighting about it and they were pointing out that nobody remembers who the villain is. And so I remember it because of Movie Fights, not because of the movie itself. But I don't remember the final battle. I just remember a few images from the beginning of the movie. I remember a few jokes in it. I remember a few plot twists. But the overall story just was forgettable to me. There was no big action sequences that were stuck out, no jokes that were actually that was a really good joke. It's just kind of more Thor. And for that reason, I put it at the bottom. There's even some of the movies like Iron Man 2, which we'll get to very soon, that has some big story issues that are memorable in and of itself. There's things in that movie that I was like, oh, that was cool. That I liked. This movie, there was just nothing that was distinctive to me. It was just kind of okay, 2 hours of Thor stuff. All right. Coming in at number 13 is Iron Man 2. I loved the first movie. It was so fun, refreshing, with great world building. So when we found out there's going to be a second one, I, like everyone else, was so excited to see Robert Downey Jr. and Jon Favreau come back to this world to get to see more of it. And thinking back on it, there's a bunch of memorable action sequences in it. There's a bunch of jokes that made me laugh. There's some cool world building with building the Avengers and stuff like that. However, the way all those pieces come together, the story that ties it all together is a total jumbled mess. And looking on what they've done in the Marvel Cinematic Universe since then, I think they learned a lot of lessons on this movie about how you can't just cram everything into it. Actually, whenever they first announced they were making this movie, Jon Favreau said he wanted 3 years to make it, and he was kind of told, no, you have 2 years or you're not coming back, we'll get someone else. And so then he agreed to do it. So he had 2 years to make it, and I think you see that in the movie. You see a movie that has some good ideas, has some very nice visual sequences, some funny jokes, but then it's just mashed together in a way that it just feels like 4 different movies that had to be kind of combined into one to make all this stuff happen. And they just had to force through to get it done by a release date. And so you've got the Mickey Rourke plotline with Whiplash, and you've got Sam Rockwell trying to get military contracts or something like that. You've got the Avengers buildup. You've got Tony's issues with his dad and memories and flashbacks. And it's all just mashed up in there, and it just doesn't tie together right. But at the same time, as you're watching it, you will laugh, you'll be excited, you'll have some good things. Just you look back on it and you go, that movie was just a mess, an entertaining mess. And there's a few sequences in it where you really go, I don't think I ever needed to see Iron Man peeing in his Iron Man costume. I didn't need to see that. So still entertaining, total mess. Coming at number 12 is The Incredible Hulk. This is kind of the black sheep of the MCU, as it's kind of the forgotten film because Edward Norton plays Bruce Banner, and then he was obviously replaced with Mark Ruffalo, and so this movie kind of gets forgotten a little bit, but it is a part of the MCU. It was the first movie after Iron Man, and so they were still trying to figure out the tone of this world and how all the pieces fit together, and I think you can really see that in this movie, that it doesn't feel quite right with the other movies. It's enjoyable. It's fun. I've never seen anyone like trash it and have a bunch of really good reasons why it's a bad movie. It's just kind of a forgettable movie. It's passable Hulk action for a couple hours, but it's not the best Hulk we've ever had, and it's not the worst Hulk we've ever had. It's just not very memorable. It doesn't have very many ties back to the MCU in a bigger, broader, more important sense. And so it's just kind of like this offshoot thing. It feels like a spin-off, whereas most of these movies feel really interconnected with one another. And like I said, it's good, it's enjoyable, it's just not that big of a deal. At number 11 is Thor, the very first Thor movie. I really liked this when I first saw it. It was an enjoyable ride, but then on reflection, when I rewatched it a few times, what I started to put together is that the feel of the movie never quite fully gelled for me. It was never as emotionally resonant as I thought it would be, and it didn't feel like the scale was consistent. So you start off in Asgard and all of these extraterrestrial realms and worlds, and it's so big and majestic. And then when we come to Earth, where the majority of the story takes place, it feels so small scale and kind of cheap. Like we're in this small town, and then we go to a small military base, and then we go back to the small town, and everything feels like itty bitty. And then we go back to Asgard, and it's big and majestic, and we've got the Rainbow Road, and so it felt very odd, and it didn't feel like it came together perfectly for me. And whereas in future Marvel movies, when they dealt with weird stuff, I felt like they really found a way to ground it nicely. This one, I didn't feel like they quite got it. You could feel the Shakespearean type sense of fathers, sons, royalty, duty, honor. You could feel that in there, but it never felt like it got to a grounded level to where we could fully understand it. Especially when you start like reflecting back on it and you go, okay, Thor learned humility over a long weekend in New Mexico. He fell in love with Natalie Portman over a weekend where he was acting weird as a crazy man from space. It had some issues like that where the core emotional elements of the story arcs relied so heavily on something that happens in such a short period of time, and it felt like a short period of time, so you didn't fully buy what you were seeing and experiencing in it. So I liked it. I love the cast and the people they brought in to play all these roles. At the same time, it's just not as good as a movie as I wanted it to be, or as I remember it being from that first viewing. I think I was trying to convince myself I liked it more than I actually did. But still a very solid movie, an entertaining time, just not one that I feel I want to rewatch a whole lot. Coming at number 10 is Iron Man 3, and this is another movie that's just really fun and enjoyable. Maybe not the best Marvel movie. I think with this one, they learned from the mistakes of Iron Man 2, where that one was just a big mess and cobbled together, too many storylines and weak characters. And then with this film, I felt like they made a new set of mistakes where they tried to be too clever with the plot twists and messing around with the comic book lore and having character arcs and development with Tony Stark that work pretty well in the movie, but they make no sense in the realm of the larger cinematic universe. And you have him making decisions at the end of the movie that have no ramifications for the future films. And so you see a lot of that, and it feels like a movie that exists well within itself, but not well within this larger universe. So I thought it was very enjoyable. The Mandarin plot twist didn't make me too mad. I just don't know that it worked great, because I wanted to see this awesome version of the Mandarin that they were building up in the movie, and then they kind of pull the rug out from underneath you, and you go, oh, that was clever. I don't know if it was great for the movie. I don't know. It's certainly going to make your comic book fans angry. You tricked me. But I don't know that I wanted you to trick me. I kind of wanted to see that thing that you were building up to and not this other thing that you delivered instead. So it's a very enjoyable film, but it's a very frustrating film at the same time. Coming at number 9 is Ant-Man. And this is a movie I was pretty skeptical of, just like almost everyone else, because it's Ant-Man. He's a lesser character. They got Paul Rudd, and I was like, I wasn't sure how that was going to work. Is he going to be too Paul Ruddy? Am I going to be able to believe him? And man, this movie was a lot of fun. And I think what's really important about this movie is that they aimed for a double, and they got it. This movie's not super high up on the list. It's kind of right there in the middle, and I think that's what they were aiming for. I don't think they ever thought that this was going to be one of the best of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but not every movie needs to be the absolute best. Getting a double, making a very solid, entertaining movie is perfectly fine. And that's what they did here. They found an interesting new take on the superhero genre with kind of this heist vibe to it. It's very small scale, both in what they're trying to accomplish in this kind of the immediate stakes of the movie. And, well, he's small, so they're small in that sense as well. And I think they delivered one of the best possible Ant-Man movies that they could deliver. And they delivered the right Ant-Man movie to deliver. Are there much better Marvel movies? Sure, but that's not a fault to this movie, and that in no way is a knock on this movie. This movie is very good at what this movie needed to be. And to its credit, it's one of the top 3 funniest Marvel movies, and it's very natural in its humor. It's very much Paul Rudd reacting to funny situations and other characters as opposed to him just being the funny man. And so they found their way to make this one distinct and unique in their universe by having it this heist genre with a weird character, but a great sense of humor, and the movie really works for what it's supposed to be. Coming in at number 8 is Captain America: The First Avenger. Now, I absolutely love the first hour of this movie. Unfortunately, the second hour to me is not as strong and the story gets a bit muddled. If I was just ranking that first hour, this is top 3 for me type stuff. Steve Rogers is a very interesting character to me as a superhero because he's a character that doesn't have a big, gigantic character flaw. He's not a broken individual. He's a person with great character who's given great ability, and he uses that to the benefit of others, but he's in a broken world that does not share his values, and that's what makes him interesting to me. We've got a lot of comic book characters with broken pasts where they've been damaged by things, that terrible things have happened, and great story arcs where they're very selfish people and then they become altruistic. Steve Rogers is interesting to me because he is someone that just has good character, and I appreciate that about him. And so the first hour of this movie is he struggles to know how to use his desire to help others, and so then he's given the physicality, but then they don't want to use him as a soldier, and all of that is very engaging and interesting to me. The problem with this movie is then you hit as soon as he rescues the POWs, he comes back, he is Captain America, and then they just montage through World War II, like montage World War II. And you watch the trailer of the movie and there's all these incredible scenes of him doing stuff. And in the movie, that's all there is. It's all montaged. And so this big, exciting story beyond his origin is just a montage. And so they've got 1 hour of him becoming the character that's like should be the first act of the movie. And then we montage the second act. And then we have the third act of the movie. And so it feels very much like they're just kind of like giving us little glimpses. Hey, Red Skull's going to be a bad guy. Red Skull's going to be a bad guy. And then finally we have this big final showdown. And there was a movie there. There was another movie to be had, 2 hours worth of him during World War II that I want to see, that I would love to see. Doesn't look like we're going to get it. I was at one point in time thinking there was some rumors and stuff that's what the Winter Soldier was going to be, a lot of flashbacks to World War II. But so this movie, great first hour. This one kind of set up that template of the origin stories within their world, kind of having a first act where you tell the origin story and then you kind of rush through some final third act finale. This movie started that trend, I feel. So, man, I wish I could rank this one higher, but that second half is pretty weak. Coming in at number 7 is Avengers Age of Ultron. Now, this movie is a blast. It is a ton of fun, but it's got 2 problems. First off, it has the Iron Man 2 problem of having too many plot lines mashed into it and not all quite coming together. And problem number 2 is that it's not as good as the Avengers. And so you go into this movie expecting something as awesome as the Avengers, so excited, they got everybody back, they've got even more resources, and you go into it and it's a lot of fun, it's just not as much fun. It works really well, but it doesn't work as well. And just there's a sense of familiarity to it. The first Avengers movies was the first time we'd ever seen all these characters pulled together. The Marvel Cinematic Universe was still under like 5 years old at the time it came out. And so there's so much freshness to the entire thing. It was so much fun. We'd never seen this happen before. And so with this movie, we've seen it before. And we've seen it better. We've seen these characters before. And we've seen them better. And so the movie, while being awesome and fun and exciting, It's not as much of any of those deals, and the story doesn't quite tie together as well. Now, it sounds like I'm bashing it, but I'm not at all. This is a very good movie. It's a very enjoyable movie. It just doesn't have a freshness to it. And I think that's the thing that I think they missed the most with this movie, is they didn't find a way to make it unique compared to the first Avengers. They didn't have that thing about it that was like, oh, they did this. So as we think about Avengers Infinity War, we're assuming that it's going to be in space or something like that. So it'll pop. It'll be awesome. When you think about Civil War, the main conflict is them coming at each other. And so it pops. It's interesting. With this movie, it's like, yeah, it's like the first Avengers, just not as good. And that's really the biggest complaint against it. If the first Avengers didn't exist and we just had this movie, I think everyone that trashes this movie their criticisms would just disappear, because this movie would be amazing to them. But because we have something to compare it to that was just better, it doesn't compare all that great. Still a very fun movie, though. With that, we're going to move into the category of movies I call triples. Movies that really brought something new and interesting to the table and just really entertained me when I watched them. Number 6 is Doctor Strange. Now, to be honest, this is the movie that just came out a couple days ago. I've only seen it one time. This movie is the one most likely to probably go further down on the list as time passes. It's probably not going to move up because I've only seen it one time, so we'll see what happens. But I loved this movie watching it, and for me, the novelty of an experience, if they can provide something unique to me, I can overlook some of the faults. And so the big criticisms of this movie are that it has a familiar template and some of the humor doesn't work. Well, for me, the humor worked enough. I could see a little bit where people are coming from, but the humor worked enough for me. And they're telling a weird story in an established world, and they made that work. And for that reason, I can forgive the fact that, like, they used a familiar template. The story was different enough, and like, well, the villain's not as good. And they brought up a bunch of complaints that felt a little bit like just we brought baggage into the movie. We're frustrated with Marvel because we love this amazing cinematic universe, but some of them get formulaic and the villains tend to not be all that strong. And so we've got that baggage. We come into the movie and we evaluate this movie in light of the grander context of the whole deal. And in light of that, yeah, you can bring up these criticisms that you could bring up against some of the other movies. But at the same time, it was a very enjoyable film with an incredible visual style to it that just entertained me and made me go, oh man, I definitely want to see another one of these. I can't wait to see what else they're going to do with this. And so for that reason, I'm going to rank it really high. And like I said, the uniqueness of this movie helped overcome the sameness of this movie. I left the movie thinking about all the cool things they did that I hadn't seen before, not about all the ways that it was like other Marvel movies. So for that reason, I'm ranking it higher than probably a lot of people will, but it was a good time that I really enjoyed, and so did my wife. Coming in at number 5 is Captain America: The Winter Soldier. Now, I love Captain America, and I've always been a big fan of him, but a lot of people, he was kind of their least favorite Avenger until this movie. And this movie just found, once again, such a great way to find a distinct spot in this very large and expansive franchise, where they made it like the 70s thriller with political aspects to it, and find a way to take a character that it's difficult to have good, strong drama and a character arc with a character that doesn't really have big character flaws. And so you take that character, and what do you have to do? You put him in a very broken world. And so his trust of authority is now a liability. And you see that becomes his story arc in such a creative and unique way to take a character that otherwise isn't that interesting to some people and make him extremely interesting because of the world that he exists within. Likewise, they found a way to have amazing action sequences without there having to be like a big gigantic beam into the sky or just tons of robot things coming after. No, they found a way to have a guy that's just like a super strong human that can do flippy things and make that cool and exciting. And they went, let's have cool hand-to-hand fighting sequences. And that's what they do. They did that the best. Once again, the humor here is great, and they found the support, they found the right way to use like Black Widow and make her interesting and integral to the story and not just feel like this side character that's tagging along. They introduced Falcon, who's this great person to kind of be someone that kind of, Steve can bounce ideas off of and joke back and forth with. And so they've built a world that's interesting. Now, my one problem with this movie is that it always felt like a stretch that they brought Bucky back. It felt felt very comic booky in the bad way. So comic books have a long history of killing off characters, and then they say, but he was frozen, but this, but he was brought back to life, and that's what this feels like to me, in a way that just feels very forced. It doesn't match kind of, I feel, the tone of what they've created otherwise. And likewise, when there's like a computer that's a talking person and they put their consciousness in the computer, it feels very comic booky in the bad ways once again. Beyond that, this is just a very enjoyable film, very strong entry in this, both the Captain America franchise and the MCU franchise. And so there's a good reason that a lot of people think this is their favorite. It is a very good film. Coming in at number 4 is Captain America Civil War. So this is the third Captain America film. It's kind of the third Avengers film. And in the realm of superhero movies, third films and trilogies tend to not be the best. And I'm happy to say in this case, it is an excellent film. What makes this movie really work is that they found a way to have two competing ideologies that make sense with the two characters. So Captain America is a person of true character that typically has trusted authority, and he has paid the price for that. And he's seen authority and he's seen authoritarian governments be evil. And so he does not trust government at this point. And then you've got Tony Stark, who is someone that is brilliant, but incredibly stupid at the same time and makes bad choices. And he needs governing authorities to stop him from doing dumb things. Those are two legitimate perspectives and worldviews. And the movie establishes why each of them would be right and wrong. And that's the actual tension of the movie, which leads to obviously a big gigantic showdown at an airport. They find reasons that it makes sense that what you're seeing is happening. And then likewise, you're getting to see something we never thought we'd ever get to see in a movie 20 years ago. And now we've gotten to see it, and they did it with excellence. Once again, the action is handled very well. And so they find fun and creative ways to handle each of these situations. Each character gets a moment to shine, to do something that's a dream come true, to get to see it on film. And then it's filmed in a way that you can actually tell what's happening, so it pays off to the fullest. My only real complaint about this movie is that there was a sense of familiarity to it. We've seen these characters before. We've even seen them fight each other before in both of the Avengers movies. And so as great as this movie was, it didn't like stir my emotions and get me as excited with just this fresh, new, exciting experience as my top 3 movies did. With that said, let's get to my final 3. These are the home runs. At number 3 is Iron Man. I really struggled with the order of all 3 of these because they're all great. But this movie was so refreshing when it came out. And it was like the movie that figured out how to do the fun comic book movie. So Nolan had figured out how to do the serious comic book movie. And this movie where it was like, this is how you do fun comic book movie right. They perfectly cast Robert Downey Jr. and I'm sure you've heard this said before, but he was not an A-list actor when this movie came out. So people my age remember him as someone that kind of shipwrecked his career in the late 90s doing drugs. And so this movie was an incredible redemption story for him as he came back better than ever in a movie that kind of has defined his career. And with that, I mean, just so many things in this movie were done right. Jon Favreau did such incredible world building that this whole cinematic universe that we're talking about now that has had so many hit movies was able to happen because this movie worked and worked so well, and he built a foundation that you could build all these different movies on. And so I just love this movie. It's very rewatchable. It's memorable. There's so many great sequences in it, so many great one-liners in it. I just could go on and on about how wonderful this movie is, and there's a reason that this movie kickstarted the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And you also have to remember, Iron Man was not an A-list comic book star before this movie came out. My wife didn't know who he was. He was kind of like B-level, B-minus level if you didn't read comic books. This movie came out, and it was so good, it shot him up to A-level. That's how powerful this movie was and how good this movie was. Coming in at number 2 is The Avengers. A lot of people have this at number 1. A lot of people have this one at number 1, best comic book movie of all time, and I would not argue with anyone that would say that. There's a good reason, because this movie is awesome. It's the type of movie that we didn't think could work, bringing all these different franchises together with all these competing actor egos together into one movie. They got a guy, Joss Whedon, who was known for doing television series that got canceled too soon. So I'm a huge fan of all of Joss Whedon's TV shows, but he'd never directed a hit movie before. So when he was picked, I was like, man, I don't know about this. I don't know if this is a good idea. And then you see the movie and it makes perfect sense in light of what Joss Whedon had been doing on television for 20 years, in light of what they were trying to do with this movie. It's the perfect mix all coming together in this movie. It was so fun, so funny. Each of the action sequences are memorable in their own way. Each of the characters get their own moment to shine. And this is just what we've been waiting for to see on screen for, my whole life. People like me that like comic books, that like comic book characters, superheroes. This is it. We got to see it, and they did it so perfectly in this movie. It's so rewatchable. Sometimes I'll go a little while without seeing it. I rewatch it. I'm like, this really is just as good as I remember. But coming in at number one for me is Guardians of the Galaxy. I absolutely loved this movie. It was a great experience for me when I went to go see it. They marketed it so well, but they hid so much at the same time. And so I just went into this movie expecting it to be really good. It was even better than I was expecting. Like I mentioned before, I've got a soft spot for novelty. So the fact that I went into this movie like, what is Guardians of the Galaxy? Why did they pick this? They cast like the side character from Parks and Rec, and they got a wrestler dude to be in it. Like, what are they doing? There's a tree character? Huh? And then the movie it's just so good, and it works on so many levels. It was so fresh and refreshing. I love that they hid Drax's sense of humor from all of the trailers. So you're watching the movie and you get like 25 minutes into it, and Drax says his first line and you go, wait, is that what he's going to do the whole movie? And then he does, and it's like the funniest thing in the movie, and none of it was in the trailers. They hid the funniest thing about the movie from in the trailers, and the trailers were still funny. And so just this movie was such a wow experience for me. It was such a novel thing to exist, and I love it when weird stuff gets to be made and brought on screen and it's done so well. And when they give a director like James Gunn the opportunity to make a movie like this, that's a recurring thing. If you look at my top 3 on here, you see James Gunn, he did like Slither and Super, which were low budget, weird movies, and they let him make Guardians of the Galaxy. You look at number 2, it's The Avengers, which was directed and written by Joss Whedon, who'd done a bunch of TV shows that I loved that were cult followings, and so he got his moment to shine, and so that's a great story. You look at Iron Man, and we talk about Jon Favreau, and he's done a lot of stuff that are big movies, but when Iron Man came out, before that he directed Zathura, he directed the movie Elf, which of course everybody loves Elf, but Elf is not a comic book movie. Like, you would not look at Elf and go, that guy should direct Iron Man. And then likewise, before that, he'd made a movie called Made, which I love, a very small scale movie with Vince Vaughn and himself acting in it. And they gave him the reins to kickstart the MCU. And he did a great job. And now we look back on Jon Favreau, and he's like, this A-list director that does all these great movies of different genres. And that's kind of what I love about the MCU, is if you look back on it, all of these actors that are now A-listers, when they hired Robert Downey Jr., he was not an A-lister. When they brought in Chris Evans, Hemsworth, they were not A-listers. When they got Chris Pratt, he was just like the B-level guy on a TV show that was pretty successful. And now they're A-listers, and they've taken a chance on actors, directors, writers, and they've crafted an incredible thing that I'm so glad and so happy that they've allowed us to have created for us. And if you're kind of growing up, you're like 18 right now and have always known the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it wasn't like this 20 years ago. We had the Batman movies from the 90s back in the 90s, and that was it. Back in the 80s, we pretty much only had the Superman movies. Now we have so many different things, and we have so many franchises even within the MCU franchise itself. And that's an incredible thing. And so all you Marvel execs that are watching this, thank you so much for what you've done. I greatly appreciate it. Anyway, done with my gushing over the Marvel Cinematic Universe rant to them. So that's my thought on the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But But how about you? What's your ranking? I've got a couple of my buddies. They've put out similar videos. Cody Leach, Mike Rock, and David O'Sullivan have all put out their own videos on ranking the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Let's make this a community. Let's have a great conversation. How do you rank the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Tell me in the comment section below. I don't want to just talk about Marvel movies. I want to talk about Marvel movies with you. Let's have a great discussion down there. If you're new to my channel and you've never checked out any of my videos, please consider clicking that subscribe button so each of these will show up in your feed in the future. And as always, thank you so much for watching.